we're moving on to Pinot, and we very deliberately did not say Pinot Noir. So we talked a little bit about the Aube, you know, the Côte des Bar, which is the very southernmost wine growing region of Champagne. This is Kimmeridgian soil, as I said. So it's a much older soil. It's calcareous, but it's more of a marl than real chalk. You know, so it's calcareous clay. Pierre Gerbais is in the village of Terroirs, which Terroirs lies at the intersection of several different river valleys. So there are like 4 rivers that all come together in this one point. And so that creates a lot of different exposures, predominantly north and south, but others too. But one thing that's really significant about that is that because of all this water, there's a great deal of humidity. And so historically, it's always been a very frost-prone terroir, right? So especially on the lower slopes. So historically, for generations, Pinot Blanc was always an important variety in Celle because Pinot Blanc is more resistant to frost than other Champenois varieties. So typically people would plant Pinot Blanc on the lower slopes and then plant Chardonnay or Pinot Noir on the higher slopes. Today, well, I mean, you know, today the climate is warmer, but also Champagne has become more standardized, right? So we really focus on the 3 major varieties. But Pierre Gerbais is sort of this, continues to be this kind of guardian of Pinot Blanc. It's a fairly large estate, but about a quarter of their plantings are actually Pinot Blanc, which is really unusual. I mean, you know, if you think like those 4 heirloom varieties in total account for 0.3% of total plantings. Only a portion of that is Pinot Blanc, and Pierre Gerbais is by far the largest Pinot Blanc landowner in Champagne. And so they use Pinot Blanc in their non-vintage cuvée as well. But in order to showcase it, they really wanted to do a pure Pinot Blanc champagne from their oldest vines. So this wine, the first wine in the flight is L'Original. This is 100% Pinot Blanc, largely from vines that were planted in 1904 in a vineyard called Les Proies. And in fact, I was just there a couple weeks ago, and this is an actual vine planted in 1904. That's in Les Proies. So this isn't actually a single vineyard wine. It's about like 80% Les Proies, these vines from 1904, and then the rest of it comes from another vineyard called Les Loges, and those vines are like a mere 80 years old or something, you know. So those are like the young vines, But I mean, this is, obviously this is incredibly rare for somebody to have Pinot Blanc vines of this age. There are 2 other producers. Cedric Bouchard, has a parcel of very old Pinot Blanc, and Charles Dufour also has some very old vine Pinot Blanc. But those are the only 3 that I know of. But yeah, so this. Well, I don't know. I mean, you can taste it for yourself. But obviously, because of the variety, it's a completely individual expression of Champagne, and something that I mean, the name is very apt, right? L'Original. And the thing is that even though it's grown in Champagne and it's made as Champagne, you can actually really see varietal character here. If you think about Pinot Blanc from Alsace or Austria or wherever, Oregon. I guess in terms of flavor, you see that it's not Chardonnay, and I think that it's recognizable as in its variety, and I think that's really fascinating. Gerbais is quickly becoming one of the most interesting estates in the Aube. They've been making wine for several generations, 4. But right now, the youngest member of the family, Aurélien Gerbais, who is only in his late 20s, he's increasingly taking over the domain. And his father Pascal has made terrific wines as well. But I think Aurélien is injecting a very contemporary aesthetic to the estate, and so doing things like this single variety Pinot Blanc champagne, and he's just doing things that kind of in this vein that I guess allowed him to explore really contemporary themes. One of them is the idea of sans soufre, or wine made without any added sulfur. So the second wine in this flight is called L'Audace. This is a single vineyard Pinot Noir. It comes from a vineyard called Sainte Marie, which is quite old in itself. And so so this is sans soufre. It's there's no sulfur at all from harvest through disgorgement. There are a few producers in Champagne who are exploring this. Drapier has been the most famous. Drapier has a Brut Nature that's sans soufre. Others in the Aube include Marie Courtin has a cuvée called Concordance. That's a very good sans soufre. Benoît Lahaye in the Montagne de France makes a fantastic wine called Violaine. Salos will oftentimes do a zero sulfur wine, but he doesn't make a big deal about it. You wouldn't even know unless you asked him. But in general, sulfur is important, right? Sulfur is an antioxidant, especially if you're shipping wine halfway around the world. Sulfur is there's nothing wrong with sulfur, I guess. It's not nearly like the huge evil beast that a lot of natural winemakers want us to believe that it is. But I think that tasting wines, provided that they're not completely oxidized, like some tend to be, tasting wines without sulfur, not just Champagne, but I think tasting wines and anywhere in the world, a well-made sans soufre wine, it gives you a different window into the variety, or it gives you or the terroir. It ends up being a very different expression, and I think that you see that in this wine. Even in Champagne, I think that it behaves the same way. You could say, I don't know, you could say it's a little oxidative, but not really. It's not, it's certainly, compared to, let's say compared to the last wine, L'Original, it feels broader, it feels more open, it feels kind of more expansive. You can see that it's vinified in barrel, but the lack of sulfur here expands the fruit in a way that doesn't happen when with, let's say, other wines, right? And so that I think is just fascinating in itself. So that that was, of course, Pinot Noir. The third wine, going back to Camille Saves in Bouzy, this is also entirely Pinot Noir. Single vineyard wine from a plot called Les Loges. The Chardonnay that we tasted from them, Les Montetour, was down at the base of the slope. Les Loges is more in the middle of the slope, which is like the most favored portion. Again, this is like Le Montateur. This is a relatively new wine for Saves. Like I was talking about before, about people exploring terroir in a way that they haven't previously. Like many other grower estates who are starting to do single vineyard wines. I think that really shows an initiative or a willingness to learn more about your vineyards, and then to learn more about your terroir, and that I think is one of the most exciting things that's happening in Champagne today. And you can see here Saves is as much a part of that as his peers. If you talk about variety, I think you would say this is a more normal Pinot Noir, I guess, than l'Audace. It's more, I guess, recognizably Pinot Noir. But you think about that Chardonnay, Le Montateur, and how you see that south-facing slope, you see the warmth and the roundness and that breadth, and I think you see the same thing in this Pinot Noir. It really speaks of Bouzy, and it demonstrates the warmth of this site. So rounding out this Pinot flight, Pinot Meunier, hardly anybody in Champagne calls it that anymore. Everybody just says Meunier. For a while, there was even a debate about whether it was actually in the Pinot family, but a lot of people wanted to believe that it wasn't. But in fact, it is. But even so, people tend to just call it Meunier rather than Pinot Meunier. As I said, Hugh Godme, has created 3 single vineyard wines, each from a different variety. So this one, Le Roman, is his Meunier. This comes from a different part of the Montagne de France. That horseshoe that we were talking about, which is really Pinot Noir terroir. If you go west, and so there's a main, for those of you who have been to Champagne, the main road running from France to Epernay, it runs north-south, and the portion that's east of that road is really that kind of horseshoe of Pinot Noir that we were talking about. The portion that's west of that road, the soils change quite a bit, and so this area is often called the Petite Montagne, just colloquially. Petite not because of issues of quality, but because it's lower in elevation, as opposed to the Grande Montagne, which is the eastern part. But so in the Grande Montagne, as we were speaking about, it's really a very chalky bedrock with various clays, calcareous clay on argilo calcaire on the surface. In the Petite Montagne, the soils are actually quite different. Here, they're much more varied. There's a lot of areas with gravel. There are several areas with sand, which is relatively unusual and not something that you think about as of Champagne having, but it's actually more common than in the Petite Montagne than like you would think. There are various different kinds of limestones, that aren't like, Cretaceous chalk. But so because of that, these it's a different varietal makeup in the vineyards, and this area is actually historically has been a major source of Pinot Meunier. So in this one of the villages in this area is called Ville de Manche, and that's where Godme has his Meunier vines. Oftentimes, I feel like, okay, so we've been talking a lot about differences in terroir, but if you talk about varietal character, we know what Pinot Noir tastes like, we know what Chardonnay tastes like. Oftentimes, I think Meunier is the most difficult of the Champagne varieties to really pin down. What does Meunier really taste like? Sometimes it has really dark fruit. like plums and like blackberry and like stuff like that. But other times it's really surprisingly citrusy. It can be like tangerine-like or like, you know, orange-like. Sometimes you have like these really like bread dough sort of notes, and sometimes you don't at all. That's probably a lot of that is probably, you know, based on where it's grown, but also it makes it very difficult to talk about varietal character. So if you talk about the Côte de Blanc as being the great home of Chardonnay, and the Montagne de France, or the Grande Montagne, being the great home of Pinot Noir in Champagne, there are two primary areas of Meunier in Champagne. One is the Vallée de la Marne, and that's the largest one and the most recognizable one. But down there, the soils are normally on very heavy clay, so that gives you very round, very rich wines. The other section of Champagne that's really well known for Meunier is this section, the Petite Montagne. And so here, because of these more stony soils, these gravelly soils, you get Meunier of more structure, I guess. So when winemakers in Champagne are, like négociants, when they're looking for Meunier, winemakers will source from different areas, depending on what character they really want to, what character they're seeking in their blends.